way to learn it is to ask someone who actually speaks that language in context and get them to teach you a few things to get by. Now, Australia, even though people speak English in Australia, it is a foreign country and therefore Australian counts as a foreign language. I'm going to teach you today 3 very important things that you need to know to be able to communicate with Australians and to understand Australians. You should be glad that I'm teaching you this because even though I'm from Australia, I am not a bloke, which is an Australian name for a man, and therefore you can actually understand me. Now the first thing you have to know about Australians is that we do not pronounce most R's that are in the middle of a word unless they begin a syllable. Let me give you an example. This that you can see behind me is a tree. Now, the R in tree is in the consonant cluster at the beginning of the syllable, and so Australians do say tree, unless they're 2 and under, and then they say twee. We do say that. We do say forest, not forest. However, if I had a phobia of this tree, and I am Australian, I would not say I'm scared. I would say I'm scared. So you might be able to tell the difference there between the R that was pronounced and the one that wasn't. So the first thing to learn about Australians is if you don't hear an R, it doesn't mean there isn't one in the spelling. We just don't like to say our R's all the time. Now this applies to names of cities and Melbourne, for example. Melbourne is an example, a city in Australia. Now most Americans that I've heard who have never been to Australia pronounce it Melbourne. Now that's not at all how you should say it. First thing to learn to speak, if you speak to any Australian ever, the 3 big cities in Australia are Sydney, which nobody has any trouble saying, Melbourne, and Brisbane, which is not Brisbane. So in addition to not saying all your R's, learn to say the cities correctly. The second tip I want to teach you is some Australian words. Now, Australians are quite lazy. We like to shorten our words. What, for example, do you, as an American, call this?
An umbrella.
An umbrella, good. Alright, an umbrella is in fact what it is, and you would find Australians who understand the word umbrella. However, generally speaking, Australians are going to refer to this thing as a brolly. B-R-O-L-L-Y. Spelling is not important, we usually speak it, not write it. A brolly. Alright, so this is a brolly, and this that I have in my other hand, over here, what would you call this?
Sunglasses.
Sunglasses. Now we're not going to say sunglasses, that's 3 syllables, way too long. To speak Australian, you would say sunnies. Alright, so I am an Australian, I am wearing a pair of sunnies, I am carrying a brolly, and if there were mosquitoes buzzing around, I would call them mozzies and I would swat at them. But the thing that you have to know as well is, and this is quite fundamental to being Australian, I am not an Australian, I am an Aussie. So just think of any words you know and shorten them, and chances are that's how Australians say them. We even do it with names. If your name is Daryl, well, it's not actually a shortening, but you become Dazza. So that's something we tend to do. Although if your name is Luke, we actually lengthen it. We usually would call you Lukey. So it's not always consistent, but at least with everyday objects you can think, add an E to it and shorten it, and you might have the word that Australians use. The third thing I want to teach you is 2 common Australian phrases. The first one is no worries. Now, no worries, which isn't specifically Australian but is one that Australians use a lot, means don't worry about it, it's not a problem, she'll be alright, she'll be fine, it's okay, you'll be... It could mean all of these things. But whenever an Australian says no worries, you know that what they're really saying is yes, no problem, I'll do it. So that's something to bear in mind. You can use that to an Australian and they'll be like, wow, that's really great, you speak my language. The second thing is good on ya, mate. That's a very common Australian expression, and what it means is good job. So if you ever hear me saying to you, good on ya, mate, or good on ya, then I'm saying good job. I just want to add a caveat here about the word mate. That is something that Australians use. Sometimes they say it more like might, alright, but it just means friend. But don't overuse it in your attempt to sound Australian. You don't say, for example, mate at the end of every sentence. That would be a caricature and not actually speaking Australian. So, I'm an Aussie, I have sunnies and a brolly. There are no mozzies here. That is a tree, but I'm not scared of it. And now you've learned a little bit about how to speak Australian.